What's up, DAW Nation? Welcome to this episode of In the DAW with Culprate, breaking down his song, Subsonics. In this episode, you're going to learn about sound design through resampling, constructing phrases with the sampler, mixing through monitors versus mixing through headphones, when to use saturation, and the best contact library for impacts, risers, and Atmos. And we're going to get started right now.
Either the bass channel or the reese. So are they layers or kind of looks like they're layers, but yeah.
Well, they're just different generations of the same thing, essentially. The one that's labelled new is the one that I actually stemmed out to mix and whatnot. The one underneath that is its predecessor, underneath that is its predecessor, and so on. Like this audio file is basically the oldest thing that I've got, because I think I was quite destructive and just flattened it and didn't keep the MIDI, unfortunately. This one is like a mock-up of how I would have made that sound, just in case you wanted me to explain it. But yeah, they're not layers, they're just there for explanation's sake, essentially.
Awesome, perfect. And is that generally how you work, preferring to, say, process one thing over and over again versus layering together one?
It depends. For this kind of track, like a D&B thing where it needs to be big and loud and everything, yeah, I'll resample because it's really, I find it really difficult to get stuff clean enough in MIDI at that volume, basically. So yeah, it just helps if I bounce it and then I can chop bits off and it's perfectly chopped, it's gone, there's no like automation involved or anything like that. So for this, I prefer to work this way, but for deliverance type stuff, like I just leave it until I need to bounce it all down to mix. For this, I do it this way.
At some stage, whether now or later, it'd be good to see how you made it.
Let's do that now. Yeah, how did you make it? I'd love to see that.
The bass sound, it's essentially, I don't know if you know the tune, but I'll play it. That bass sound is essentially what I'm going to explain. Going back over it, the generation before that, it's quite different, but kind of the same. Going back again, there's a definite difference there, but yeah, and the only thing that I did really, another group and another file makes it look like so much work than it actually is. I just literally put a Pro MB on it and as an expander. Only had it coming in when it was triggered by a sidechain, essentially. So I went from a really white, noisy, sort of wide, flabby mess, essentially, to something that's a lot tighter and more defined in the high end that had a shape. It didn't really need another project file for that, to be honest, but, you know, I just felt it was cleaner to do it that way. So the initial noise that I made all of that bass out of is this. So it's just like a one-note reese, which is essentially just two saws and some white noise, which is distorted quite a lot. This is the one here. So I then put that in a sampler and just looped a certain section of it. I just played around with the start point until I found something that sounded like a nice groove, essentially. If I move it, it sounds completely different. I toyed around with different positions until I, like I said, got something that I liked, and then I layered it with a sub, essentially, because the sub on that was a bit flabby, basically. Just a normal sub. The way that I work most of the time is just I would get basis for my sound like that, basically, and then just start adding harmonics, and then that's also got, yeah, okay, so a low pass version of the original sound, essentially, and then that has another set of harmonics layered on top of that again. So yeah, together it's changed now, but yeah, you get what I mean. It's just adding what I think is missing rather than tweaking a preset. So I've got the sound that I wanted. Now that it's just time to sort of thicken that out sine waves, essentially. That's essentially how I work.
Is that usually your sound design process, is that you create the sound somehow, some way, you flatten it, and then you throw it into a sampler in order to sequence it in the arrangement? Is that usually your workflow?
50-50, really. I often do like to just make the sounds in a synth and keep them there as long as possible, but then when the synth isn't doing what I want it to do, then bounce. Obviously this, I was just messing around at first. I wasn't even meaning to make a tune, and I found something that sounded cool and just went from there. But the thing that I do all the time is just layering harmonics around the sides and stuff, whether that's from a resampled over a resampled bit or just straight out of a synth. The thing that I would do this for every single time is the fills at the end of bars, which are like really mental sounding. Generally use this technique for those pretty much every time, just because you get more interesting sounds and they aren't always as predictable as a synth, so you can get some pretty obscure things without having to do much stuff.
When layering that subwave sine wave thing back in, did you have to worry about that phasing with the original sub, or was there not much in the original?
If you didn't want it to phase with the original sub, then yeah, you'd have to worry about that. I wanted that movement, so I just left it in there. Obviously, I didn't actually leave the stereo in the sub in the final. I got rid of that, but the movement remained. So like that's why I did that, to get the movement. But yeah, if you didn't want it to phase and like move around, then yeah, you would have to worry about that definitely. And that's where moving the harmonics up the series would eliminate that completely. So yeah, that's why I generally go for third, sometimes fifth and 10th. And sometimes second. I'll rarely just layer another fundamental on top of a fundamental, because yeah, you will just get major phasing issues, which probably won't be very good.
Yeah, I suppose that's one thing oftentimes people forget, is that yeah, so sometimes that like phasing is actually desirable. I mean, yeah, I even forget about that sometimes myself.
Yeah, no, totally. For this tune, well, it wasn't the original idea, but when I actually had the basic vibe of the tune, I was like, oh, this sounds like, I don't know, late 90s D&B sort of thing. That's the sort of vibe I wanted to go for, and that was the method that they would have used basically, so I thought it was authentic.
Your drums, I really want to know about your drums. So the syncopation and the groove that you get with your drums is incredible. How do you do that? How does the Culprate do that?
Because I have no idea what I'm doing with this. Basically, I know the bare minimum of music theory, and that's all melodic. None of that's really rhythm. I know what an 8th note and 16th note is, but that's where it stops, essentially. All of the sort of the weird rhythms in my tunes are just done by ear. Like there's no technical process behind it. It's just like, does that sound good? Move it. Laborious and like probably really tedious to watch. That's how I get the results, essentially, just spending hours just guessing.
Spend a lot of time just like slightly moving stuff around.
Yeah, that's it. Move it left, move it right. And in a file like this, you can imagine that gets like really long, basically. So I'll shuffle quite a lot, but that's something that a lot of people do. Obviously, in this tune, I haven't shuffled at all because it's 172, and that shuffles start to sound a bit messy.
For those who don't know what shuffling means, what does shuffling mean in this context?
To shuffle a groove, you would basically be taking the bits in between the main quarter notes, or the main 8th notes, and just moving them slightly left. Well, no, slightly right, sorry. But you can move them slightly left as well. But that's essentially what a shuffle is. You're just shifting the timing of the 16th notes in between the 8th notes. Probably explained that really badly, but again, I know nothing about rhythm. I just guess.
So another term that we use is swing. So it's you going in and putting swing to it. Yes, shuffle, swing, kind of the same concept. So walk me through when you program your drums. You just like start with your kick and make sure that's tight on the grid, and then add the other elements in and shuffle them, or what's the process?
If I do choose to put a swing or a shuffle like on my tune, it will be on everything. It won't just be on the hats. I'll have to almost decide before, but like sometimes I decide afterwards and have to go back and just reshuffle everything. I will shuffle literally everything, even the bass, like the lead sounds, everything will follow the same grid. I like to mix very mono heavy, and if you've got different rhythms, different grooves, different shuffle times going, or different swing times going over each other in mono, it sounds really messy. It just sort of puts me off of doing that. So I swing everything if I choose to do that. That actually makes it a bit easier for me, because like I just need to reference something else, and it's like, oh, right, that needs to go over there or whatever, you know. So that takes a little bit of the guesswork out, but it's still 99% guessing.
And is that you like literally manually lining up the audio, like I personally do, or is that using the groove pool in?
No, I don't really use the groove pool, because it means that you're going to be stretching the audio into that groove, essentially. I mean, it's okay for percussive loops that are quite tight sounding anyway, like they don't have tails that bleed over the next transient. But if you have like, I don't know, an old break or something, it just makes it sound really choppy. So I rarely do that. I do it manually. But yeah, also I just like doing it manually as well, because I just know where I am with it. It is what it is, you know. So there's no guessing. But yeah, generally when I start, I will start with the kick and snare. Try and get everything sounding good without hats, completely without hats, because then you don't need to go overboard with the hats, because I find that sometimes I listen to tunes and the hats are actually making up for a lack of dynamics and groove within the tune itself. They're just like a big wash. So that's something that I like to, well, I try to avoid where possible, but sometimes it can be used to creative advantages, but I rarely do that. So yeah, I just try and get the groove solid with just the kick and snare, and also use the basses as percussion and stuff like that. So, and the hi-hats are almost an afterthought, in honesty, for me. And generally they'll just be super basic ones, almost characterless, so that I can really drive them, and they just that brings out a certain character. That's how I'd go about it.
And I'm assuming this is going to change from song to song, but do you usually, the very start of the project, you start with the drums and then move to the sound design, or sound design drums, or does it just depend?
Yeah, like I said, it depends. For this type of thing, I would probably start with some sort of beat, like a kick and snare, just so I have a frame of reference to put bass around. Then I'd go on to the bass, obviously. The beginning of my tunes is literally just an interaction between the drums and the bass, and then everything else just gets added on afterwards. And like risers and effects and stuff are like literally the last 1% of everything I do. Like, most of the versions won't have anything like that in it. It'll just be bass and drums and maybe pad or something, or lead.
Curious what the difference between mix bus and stuff bus is.
Okay, so the mix bus down here is literally, it's just a bus that I send literally everything to before the master, just so that I can put on like a compressor and stuff like that. It's all bypass because I don't keep it on there when I export it, but it's just to hear what it might sound like when it's mastered, because things do change a little bit. It's not really necessary, but it's just a reference, another frame of reference that I like to use, basically. And the stuff bus is everything that isn't drums or bass, so like synths, vocals, and Atmos. Well, okay, Atmos is going to mix bus, but yeah, you know what I mean. Everything that isn't drums and bass essentially goes to that bus, and then maybe would have a global side chain on it. This time it doesn't. It's just a saturator, just to give it a bit extra like presence, or maybe just flatten it off, because I use this saturator as a limiter a lot of the time. But yeah, that's the difference. I usually have a lot more buses, but this is a really old project. It's from 2015.
I have seen a lot of the saturator on a lot of your different chains down here. So you are just using it basically as like a soft clip limiter kind of thing?
Yeah, no, essentially, yeah. I put it on everything, actually, to be fair. You can push it quite far without it sounding rubbish. This is quite a good one. And it does actually limit. Yeah, it doesn't let anything go over the output, which is nice. If I was to whack a limiter on there, it would sound limited. Like, it's like the transients just come through really nicely with this. I will never use it to sort of boost level per se. Like, I always take out what I put in, so it's literally there to flatten stuff off without limiting. And if I don't want to compress, if it sounds too compressed, I'll use a saturator, which is often the case. But yeah, I put it on everything. I think it's necessary, especially everything inside the in Ableton. It's sterile essentially. You know what I mean? It has no character whatsoever. So they need like a bit of grit. I think that's what people like about analog stuff. It's a bit gritty. So add that little bit in.
Have you found any other digital VST style saturators that you like, or is this one take the cake?
This one is my favorite because it is so effective. It's nothing special. It doesn't sound like, wow, that's like tube, or you know what I mean? It doesn't sound like really analog or anything like that, but it's a low CPU hit. I can put it on every single channel, and like I could put 5 of them on every single channel if I wanted to. It wouldn't make a dent. So yeah, I mainly use it because of that, really. And I know where I am. It's really simple. It's just 2 controls. I only use 2 controls essentially. I don't really use a DC because, well, I do sometimes, but rarely. And yeah, I never use a soft clip either, because it just, all that's doing is essentially adding another one on the end of it. It's just easy. I mean, I used to use the Antares. It's really old.
They have one called Warm, and that thing is amazing.
Yeah, mate, there are a lot out there. Like Saturn's good as well, and Saturn. I do use Saturn sometimes. This thing is incredible. It really is, but you can't really push it as far as the Ableton one, which I'd use this one for character, and I'd use like the Ableton one for leveling essentially. But yeah, this is from like 2002 or something stupid like that. It's really old. It's like the first VST I ever got. Again, it's simple and effective. Like, you've got 2 settings, heavy and light, you know, and the Omnitube, I think, I can't even remember what that does. It's amazing. I've never found another saturator that sounds quite as good as that, basically.
But you do feel like the Ableton one you can push farther.
Yeah, easily. It's like it's more transparent, basically.
Your drums do sound very pleasing. They're not too harsh. They're not too compressed. They're not too anything like that. Is that a result of you using a lot of the saturator, or how do you process your drums?
Can't go back on the drums practically on this file because I've only got these, but generally I compress a lot, but not to bring out transients per se. Like I do that as well, but I would do that in parallel. Like I just like to over compress the kick, so like ridiculous settings, so like no attack, no release, maximum ratio, just slam, use that, but then bring it, like resample that maybe, and then do like multi-band gating on it. So like, because you've really over compressed it, you've brought out all this hiss in the tail, so like I'd gate that down in the top. And I use a volume shaper by Cable Guys, yeah, it's really good, man. But I'm still on version 4, but still works. But yeah, I'd use that to just tidy up the top end, so all you get is the attack. I actually, I use the volume shaper again. I roll in the highs, so anything above 1K actually gets rolled into, it gets taken off of the transient, but gets allowed on like the body, and then gets taken out again for the tail. So all the high end in the kick will be in the body, not the transient, and the transient will just be like pure, like I don't know, 500 to 800 hertz. It would just be like knock instead of hiss and click. So I really hate clicky drums, so I try to take as much of that out as possible without it sounding like muffled. But yeah, then I'd resample that again and just be left with a kick, essentially. But yeah, the snare is a similar process. I wouldn't compress it as much because it doesn't generally need it. But yeah, I would use a very, very similar process, but I wouldn't roll off the highs. I would roll off the lows, keep the snap on the snare. I wouldn't roll off the snap. But that's essentially what I do most of the time. Yeah, just really like destroy the sound and then tidy it up with gates.
Well, what is the SCHEPS? Is that how you say it? The SCHEPS 73?
It's a 1073 EMU preamp, essentially, an EQ. So I use it to drive the sound a little bit. It's really, 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 really subtle. Really brings out transients. It doesn't make them louder. It just makes them more audible in the mix. It's really weird. I don't know how it does it, but I've got exactly the same preamp in hardware, and it sounds pretty much the same. I wouldn't be able to distinguish between them, basically. So yeah, that's one of the things that I put on a lot of different channels, because who doesn't like the Neve sound? Really, to be honest, that is definitely something that I use quite often nowadays. And again, that's really the only plugins that I generally buy. I mean, I buy sort of tools like the volume shaper, things that sort of emulate things for character, essentially. That's what I buy, because the Ableton stuff is more than adequate, for every task, essentially. And if they're not, the FabFilter stuff is. So I wave stuff anyway for character.
Also mentioned volume shaper. So do you use that for sidechain compression, or do you do it more manually?
Sometimes. For this tune I did, just because I needed it to be like really dramatic. I needed it to be gated out, essentially, not just dipped. That's when I'd use it, essentially, when I needed it to be fully gated out. So and I use a sidechain on top, because if you go down right away, just like the line going down in volume shaper, it makes a click. Yeah, so you have to sort of give it a few milliseconds just to roll it off instead. So you never fully get a sidechain on the transient. So I like to put an actual compressor afterwards, and 20 milliseconds, just take that tiny little bit out, so the transient has full room to breathe, and like it will be the same every time. Then it won't change depending on what bass it's over, sort of thing. So, but yeah, the volume shaper is great for that. I used to use it in multiband while sidechaining. It sounds weird, man. It sounds weird to me when the bass is gone and all the tops are still there. It's just like, whoa, it feels like my ears have stopped working properly for a minute. So yeah, I tend not to do that with it.
The little like down-sampled vocal thing you got going on, what is that guy?
That is another really old VST. It's a Speak and Spell VST. Yeah, it's just literally a Speak and Spell that I've bounced out, basically.
And I've never heard of that before. What is that?
Oh, right, okay. I'll try and open it, see if the project will allow it. No, I don't have it anymore, because I obviously thought it was stupid or something. But yeah, no, the old toys, the Speak and Spell toys, it's essentially an emulation of that. Like, you can just type in anything and it just reads it out in that silly voice.
The isotope vocal synth has the same algorithms, but you'd have to have the words kind of spoken yourself, or
yeah. Like, to be fair, I did actually contemplate just saying the words in and vocoding it with bass, but then I decided against it, because it would have just been a linear stream of bass, and I like to break it up a little bit. Some days I regret it still, but some days I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Do you do your own mixing?
Yeah. That's something that's the one thing I love about it, because the creation itself, I'm not really a musician, so I mean, I struggle with that. It's actually really hard and challenging, but the mix is where like I can actually really enjoy. I'm like the opposite to a lot of people in that respect. Like, a lot of people hate the mix, but I love it, man. I can sit there and just listen to it and like just tweak things and like just be like, oh, that's not perfect, just make that perfect thing. I don't know.
And I'm assuming you do it in the room that you're in right now, right?
Yeah, it's terrible. The room is absolutely shocking. Even with all of these boards around me, like it's shocking. Like my desk gives out like 150 hertz resonance, and like it's impossible basically. But I mean, I know it now. I can work with it.
So you do mix through monitors. You don't mix through your headphones?
Sometimes, yeah. Well, actually, to be fair, that's a total lie. I mix a lot on my headphones. I don't trust them for transients, because these headphones, I don't know about other headphones, but these headphones are rubbish at transients. I will get it sounding good on them, and then I'll take the headphones off, put the monitors on, and it'll just be like, bam, bam. It's like, whoa, what? How did I miss that? That's just horrible. And there's other things as well I don't trust the headphones for, like space. I don't trust the headphones for space, because 180 degrees separation is just, you can't tell anything from that. It's just left and right. You can't place anything. So yeah, if I want to actually, and for depth as well, I trust the monitors more for depth. Even with this room, headphones don't have any depth essentially, unless, I don't know, all of these probably do, but I don't know. I mainly mix on my headphones and just use the monitors for reference because of my room. I know for a fact that if I did mix on here, there would be all sorts of problems basically. It would take so much longer as well, and I can't have it up loud because someone lives above me and someone lives below me, and we've got a kid in the house, and it's just like, plus I've got the sub pack now, so I don't need to feel it from the speakers anymore. But yeah, like I said, for transients and space, I need the monitors even in this room. Headphones just don't do it.
Question with the sub pack, because I've heard a lot of people that they're kind of going that way. They're in the situation that you are. They have neighbors or kids or whatever, and they can't blast the bass. So do you use the sub pack and you kind of know how hard the sub pack is supposed to hit relative to other things, and that's kind of how you use it to know if your bass is okay?
I don't use it necessarily to check the level of my sub bass, because you should be able to hear that. It should have enough presence and affect the rest of the tune in such a way that there's enough sub bass in there. But I use it to check like rumble, like really low, like 20 hertz rumble and stuff like that I can't hear at all, that would just go unnoticed. And then at mastering stage, it would need to be rolled off and I'd lose bass. So yeah, I check that on it basically, rather than the level of my bass. Often it will be the relationship between the low end of the kick and the sub. So it's not necessarily to gauge how loud it is, but relationships within the tune. So I don't need to like reference another tune or anything like that. Just, I'm comfortable with the levels coming from the headphones basically.
So how long would the entire process for mixing take roughly? We're talking like 4 hours, or? I
mix for other people, and like generally if the tune's good, yeah, about 4 hours. If it's in a really bad state, about 13 hours. But my tunes, I will write the tune in about 2 days. But then about maybe 8-9 months to a year I'll spend just tweaking, because that's the part that I love. Like I said, I can do it forever on tunes basically. But realistically, it should only take about 4 hours, but I long it out.
So what would define something that'd be good that would only take a couple hours, as opposed to something that'd be bad that would take forever?
A good example that would take 4 hours, like 2 to 4 hours, would be like a dance track that has relatively good levels. Like, to the untrained ear, it doesn't need a mix down. That's what I mean by that. But to the trained ear, like, yeah, it does. And like after the mix down, it's so much better. So yeah, I mean, that's the point at where it wouldn't take very long, because it would just be like tiny bits and pieces here and there. There would be no like intense editing and like copying a section. But worst case scenario, yeah, you're doing a lot of that, sort of replacing like drums because they're just so weak, and like, but replacing them in such a way where you only reinforce them, and you have to keep the tonal character and the timbre of the sound itself, because that's what they wanted. So yeah, that's when it takes ages, because you get all sorts of like, I don't know, phase problems that you need to sort out. And yeah, that's the long bit. And also poorly recorded vocals, that's what takes the longest. They want a certain result, but the source material is like whack essentially, you know, so you've got to do so much to clean it up, and it just takes ages. And often that sort of thing, you'll need to do it and then wait a day, come back on fresh ears and check it again, because it's just so labor intensive that you just after the ninth hour you just haven't got a clue where you are. So but yeah, they're the two examples of what that would be essentially.
So how do you generally think about stereo imaging? Do you try to keep it mostly mono, or do you ever play with the stereo side of things?
I try and keep all of my main sounds in mono, but obviously have them have stereo parts. So like if you drop it into mono, all of a sudden the sound won't actually change, it will just become narrow. Everyone's guilty of this. I'm guilty of this as well, where it's like, oh, that'll do, that'll be fine. No one will play it in mono anyway. But yeah, when you collapse a tune into mono and all you can hear is sub bass and the kick and snare, that's all you can hear, and it's like really bugs me. So yeah, I try and like have it all really clear in mono and have top end and body and everything and clarity and detail. That's the main thing, because that's why I don't use a lot of reverb as well, because I find that it messes with the mono signal. I don't like the way it does it. I try and get everything mono essentially. If I play this in mono, it will probably sound pretty similar, if not exactly the same. So I'd use this and just always have that on the master, just so I can reference it in mono or just the size if I need to. So that doesn't really sound any different, you know what I mean? Like if I just played it like in stereo, so you're not missing anything. Like that's what I aim for essentially. I don't want anything to disappear in mono. So yeah, I will start all of my sounds completely mono, and then like I was saying earlier, I'll add harmonics around the sides and maybe white noise on the top just to bring brightness at the sides. But yeah, the main source sound will be completely mono, and I think that's the way that a lot of people that make that heavy sort of resampling based music, that's how they work, I think, to my knowledge anyway. It's all about mono, especially because you get it on a system and it could actually just be mono, and then you get there and it's like all you can hear is sub bass and drums. So yeah, I just didn't want that, because I've experienced that before. A clap has just completely disappeared, and I'm like, what's going on here? And the rest of the crowd can hear it, but in the monitors it's mono, so I can't hear it, so it's really confusing. So yeah, I didn't want that, so that's why I do that. Just a weird OCD thing. But yeah, it gets a more solid sound if like your main elements are totally mono, just with the peripherals being stereo. It actually makes the stuff that is stereo seem wider as well, because everything's like within the tune. You got to reference it to the elements that are in the tune. So if everything is wide, nothing will seem wide. It will just seem really phasey. So yeah, you got to have some elements that are in mono to make it all sound wider.
When you want to make a track that you definitely want to work live, like as the main purpose of the track, so what's like the main thing you think of that you need to kind of consider almost? Is it the loudness or the way things are balanced? Or
loudness is a big part of it. That will be how I go about the whole tune. In fact, how loud I want it to end up. If it's for live, I will smash everything, but then I'll gate it off so that it sounds clean, but it will be really smashed and saturated so that it's loud. But yeah, if it's like a deliverancy type thing, I won't do that at all. I'll be really gentle with all that, just because it doesn't need to compete with any other tunes. A lot of tunes are really loud these days, so it's they've got to stand up essentially, otherwise it's a big anti-climax when they're mixed in. So
what is your process, your strategy behind like the call and response between like the bass and the other elements of the song? Not necessarily drums, because you showed us like how to do your drums, but like after you get your drums done, how do you go about doing like call and response and sequencing with the bass and other elements of the song? Because I find like with students, that's a question they ask a lot, is like how do you do call and response? How do you properly do that?
Probably going to really oversimplify this, but like think of it as a conversation between two people. Someone says something and then there is an appropriate response to that. It doesn't have to be, totally in key or melodic or anything like that. But I think the best example of call and response is Square Feet by Noisia. I don't know if you've heard that. It's really old. It was off like Split the Atom or something like that. But mate, that tune is like one of their first halftime tunes as well, I think. And like it sounds like two bass lines having a conversation. Literally, it's not like a banger or anything like that. It's like just fat, and it's just a conversation between two basses. I mean, without going like I don't know, really. It's a very difficult thing to actually explain simply. One easy way of looking at it would be from a sound design perspective. So you start your phrase with a reese, and that's like, everyone knows what that is. You just have a single note or like two notes, nah, nah, and then your response to that would be percussive basses. You know, just a juxtaposition almost. But yeah, in terms of melodically, like, it's really difficult to say because I've got the bare minimum theory knowledge. But yeah, the sound design thing, the sound design method is the easiest way to achieve that. That's the way that I do it most of the time, actually. Like, if the reese is first, percussive bass second, vice versa, sort of thing. That's mainly what you'll hear in my tunes, actually. There'll be like long notes and then percussive notes. Like I said, probably oversimplifying that quite horrendously, but difficult one to answer without the
All good, man.
What was the most difficult part of this track?
It was the top end, I think. Just getting the top end mix right. Because I work mainly without cymbals right away, it means that I can go a bit overboard with the top end in the bass. Once it's printed, it's printed. So I bounced a load of white noise in with my bass to begin with, which is I kind of regret a little bit now because, yeah, a little bit of control's nice. But yeah, I went backwards and forwards between boosting frequencies, cutting them, boosting them, cutting them, and this went on for weeks, man. It was ridiculous. So yeah, at the end of it, I just ended up actually turning the hats down, and it's something that I could have done at the beginning. So yeah, that was difficult, just because I was being a spaz, not because it is actually difficult, but just because I was being an idiot. But yeah, other than that, like the Atmos, I really struggled to like find sounds that sort of brought the whole tune together without being intrusive. Yeah, I can't even remember where I got these from now. I think it was when I bought OMNISPHERE, just like playing around with the granular thing in that. Accidentally, just like came across all this stuff with so yeah, I wouldn't have thought of like adding anything like that. I don't know. There was a bass line just granularized essentially with a bit of reverb on it. But yeah, that took me ages to figure out what to put in there. And like that's my main struggle with making tunes, actually putting things in them. Like, it's just I do struggle. I find it hard. But I think that's maybe the appeal too. You know, it's a challenge, like properly a challenge. Every aspect of it was quite difficult, to be even more vague.
You know, within, let's say, the last year, the last couple months, what has been one of your favorite sound design techniques that you've came across that you're like, yeah, this is really cool?
Man, like, yeah, all of my techniques are mega old. One thing that has actually caught my attention recently, because like after this EP was released, I started working on another album, basically, like another Deliverance type thing. I was struggling with tape emus, basically. I've got the Slate one, and it sounds nice. It doesn't, like, basically my problem with tape emus is that the wow and flutter on there is never any good, and it never actually sounds like a tape machine. It's just an oscillator going up and down, which is not what it is. It's like a line that sort of goes like that. It's like noise almost introduced into a sine wave. It's really complex and evolving. So what I've started doing is putting just a simple delay on a track. I'll do it here, like a simple delay. I'll put it on the Atmos because it'll probably work best on there. It won't be intrusive. So, okay, and I'll group it. It doesn't take too long. And so I'll put one of these on every single channel, but I will put it on time, so it's in milliseconds now. And maybe put it to like, well, somewhere down there, and then link it to a macro. But then this is where like they all differ. Like each track will have their own settings. So like one track will have like 3 milliseconds and I don't know, 12 milliseconds, and that will be the buffer between 3 and 12 milliseconds delay. I could make it even more extreme just to actually demo it. And then I'll go through it, like have it somewhere in the middle, because like it's nice to have sounds offset, especially if you want them to sound real, which is what I wanted for this other project. It actually makes it sound like they're being played by different people instead of just robotically on a like quantized grid. So yeah, then I would go in and just draw tiny bits of automation. And then it's really hard to hear on this sound, but yeah, it just makes it like pitch up and down, and I can do it even more dramatically, so you can actually hear.
And is that with the repitch mode turned on for simple delay? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's a crucial factor. Thank you for pointing that out. So yeah, you can hear it sort of like wobble and stuff. Like, yeah, so that's the way that I do my wow and flutter, and then I'll put a tape EMU after that with no wow and flutter, just for the tube effect or the tape effect, you know. So that's one thing that I've learned recently I have to do, because it's just an oscillator. It's nothing. It's tape heads don't behave like that, so they behave more like this, like randomly. So like,
so have you seen the new, I think they brought it out in Live 10 unless you had Max for Live, but you could get the new LFO device, and that's got some pretty, you can turn up the jitter, I think it is, and stuff. You can pretty much get that delay time moving around automatically in that sort of way.
Yeah, I did try that actually. That was the first thing I tried, and I found that it would make really cool results, but not where I wanted them. Do you know what I mean? I want the sounds to pitch into each other and like warp around each other, not just be like up and down, you know. But yeah, that's the first thing I tried essentially. But I do this so that they sort of, and I'll automate like like peaks and troughs where I want the pitching to happen essentially. And that's why I do it this way. Otherwise, yeah, that's perfectly valid. For precision, I just do it this way. That's something that I only just discovered the other day actually, so I guess that's a new thing, but a very, very, very simple thing, but like really, really effective actually when it's not on this sound apparently. But yeah, like if you've got I don't know, contact libraries, it's really good on them, really good.
Could you give 2 or 3 examples of lessons you have learned since achieving your level of success in the music industry?
I've learned that it's not as scary as people think. It's a lot more work than people think, but that's not necessarily scary, no. So yeah, when people say you might want to get a real job, it's like, I work twice as much as you. It's a lot of work, and that's one thing that I've learned since actually developing a name for myself. I just underestimated that grossly. I just thought, yeah, it'd be fun, but actually, you know, it's very time consuming. So I just also discovered that I had to give up socializing as well. Another thing that I learned is that it is imperative to have a few really good, trustworthy people around you. I think that is the most important thing, be that a manager or an agent or whatever. I mean, at first, obviously, that's not important, and but seriously, that's one of the major lessons that I've learned. I wouldn't have a career without my manager. That's the truth. Like, because I mean, I can do what I do, but then I'm the sort of person that no one would ever hear this stuff. You know, I wouldn't post about it or anything. I don't do that really. That was a big realization that, man, like I need this group of people. So yeah, finding a small group of people that are trustworthy, and that's probably the most important thing you can do for your career. Actually, everything else is kind of superseded by that. I reckon.
Would you like our feedback on your song?
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Song, super dope. Love the basses, love the sequencing, love the syncopated drums and all that kind of stuff. Just like the Culprate feel to it, right? I absolutely love that. I love what was going on. I have a bit of feedback for your Atmos though, because you said that was something that you really struggled on. So you got this particular Atmos from OMNISPHERE, right?
Yeah, just playing with the granular thing, yeah.
Have you ever messed around with Gravity by Heaviosity?
You know, I toyed with like the idea of buying that, but I just didn't. Do you suggest it? Is it any good?
I would highly suggest it. It is probably the best like Atmos, riser, downer, impact combination contact library I've ever heard in my life. I mean, Adam, you can vouch for this, right?
After your serums and fat filter stuff, it's like right next in the list of things that, I mean, it's not cheap, which is the one downside, but it's like 100 out of 100 like top quality stuff. It's crazy good.
Give that some more thought then in that case. So yeah, because it's something that I look at every time I'm going on like a VST buying binge. I do look at that and I'm like, oh, I could get that, but I just never do. I'll have another look at that. Every
impact that I ever use ever now is from Gravity. It's just because like it really just like takes the best bits from like the most hardcore cinematic strategies, but like put it in a way that like us as artists can use. Like it's so great.
Yeah, I'll check it out, man.
Other than that, dude, love the song, love the EP. It's all fantastic, man. Really love what you're doing.
Since we talked about saturation earlier, it's certainly not as light on the CPU as the Ableton Saturator, but if you are looking for more like strange distortion types. I don't know if you checked out Isotope Trash 2. There's probably about 100 different distortion modes, let alone the fact you can then draw in your own wave shaping shapes. But it probably doesn't have the analog vibes that you'd want if you want like proper analog stuff necessarily, but certainly if you want more flexibility to choose your own harmonics and wave shaping, it's been my go-to for years.
Yeah, because I do have that actually, and I have used it occasionally. I mean, I think I'll need to have like, I don't know, a proper session with it and actually learn it properly, because it seems quite like, I don't know, pretty much endless of the things you can do with it in that respect. So I found that it's really good for just absolutely smashing things, like brutalizing them. That's what I do it for, just like completely like brutalizing things. And I find that when I do that, it flattens out the top end really nicely. Like, and if you've got any stereo information in your source material, it really brings it out, because I don't know what it's doing, but it's distorting. But yeah, it is really nice. But it's underused by me. I don't use it a lot at all. It's just because I forget to actually. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's definitely a good one, man. Decapitate is another good one as well, actually.
Yeah.
Sound toys,
yeah. I've been meaning to spend more time with that.
Did you have a good time on the show?
Yeah, man. Fully.
Hey, DAW Nation. Hope you enjoyed this episode of In the DAW with Culprate breaking down his song Subsonics. If you did, please like, comment, subscribe, and click that little notification bell so that you get notified every time we release something. And also, if you're interested on the more emotional, philosophical, artistic, and music business side, make sure to check out our companion podcast, Behind the DAW. Links in the description. Also, Culprate decided to give you a little gift for watching this episode. It may be a sample, it may be a preset, who knows what it is. Go ahead and check the link in the description to find out what it is. Also, there is a bunch of links in the description for a bunch of things that we talked about today, so if anything caught your interest, make sure to check the links in the description for those things. And finally, if you're interested in keeping these interviews free forever, make sure to check out the Patreon. Starts at $1 a month, and if you decide to go up to the $5 a month tier, you get access to a private Discord community where we live stream all of these interviews that we do right at the beginning, right when we're doing them. You get to ask your own questions, and we get to pick a lucky winner from our patrons every week to be able to come and join us on these calls. ASANA was the lucky patron for this week. He was able to come in and meet Culprate and ask questions and so on and so forth. So if you're interested in that while keeping these interviews for free, please check out the Patreon. Starts at $1 a month, but if you want those live streams, please $5 a month. It's going to be fantastic, I promise you. Thank you so much for joining us this week. Make sure to check back here in 2 weeks when we release our next episode with Tynan. But DAW Nation, have a fantastic day. Thank you so much.